The world's oldest novel tells the story of a brave hero, a dangerous journey, and the search for meaning in a cruel world. In fact, it might be exactly the book you'd expect, except it was written thousands of years before the Bible, the Iliad, or even Disneyland. Let me introduce you to Gilgamesh. He was a demigod, part human and part divine, and he ruled the Sumerian city of Uruk, somewhere in present-day Iraq, some 4,000 years ago. Sounds like King Arthur meets Abu Dhabi, right? Well, think again. Gilgamesh was a bit of an asshole. He delighted in being cruel and selfish. Basically, he was everything you wouldn't want your Uber driver to be. Now, the locals loved him anyway, because according to them, he was a god. But even gods can get annoying. And when Gilgamesh started harassing the daughters of his city, the gods got fed up. They needed to bring him down a peg or two, like shoot him in the foot with a metaphorical arrow. But what kind of punishment could possibly stop a merciless demigod? The answer? Fashion. The gods created a rival for Gilgamesh, a hairy wild man named Enkidu, who liked nothing more than wrestling bears and making love to bunnies. Well, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that these activities tend to disqualify you from the top spot on the most eligible bachelor list. And Gilgamesh was considered the most eligible bachelor in all of Mesopotamia. So naturally, the gods didn't match them up on Tinder, but threw them together in a fight. In a battle for the ages, neither man could defeat the other. But afterward, both sat down, catching their breath, staring at the ground, trying to come to terms with the heat, the dust, the humidity, and the guy in front of them. Suddenly, Gilgamesh turned to Enkidu and said, "You know what? You're pretty cool. Want to hang out sometime?" In the original text, the phrase was more poetic, but you get the idea. This unlikely duo became best buds, which makes our story a lot like The Odd Couple, except with more fighting, less furniture smashing, and maybe a couple of talking trees thrown in for good measure. Together, the two friends set out to slay Humbaba, the terrifying guardian of the cedar forest, a sort of Bigfoot Sasquatch Yeti mashup. In those days, slaying monsters was all the rage among heroes. Think about it. Heracles, Theseus, George McFly. It's a long list. But slaying Humbaba was harder than it seemed. He had magical powers and defeated Gilgamesh, leaving him for dead. Luckily, Enkidu brought his buddy back to life. So maybe it wasn't the greatest team ever assembled, but they did win in the end. Then Gilgamesh messed things up again by killing Ishtar, the goddess of love, after she had dumped him and threatened to unleash a scorpion-like monster upon him. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu decided to go on a little trip to the ends of the earth, hoping to find the secret to immortality there. That was probably a terrible idea. As soon as they arrived, the gods killed Enkidu. Gilgamesh was devastated. To honor his friend, he embarked on a series of adventures, confronting monsters and spirits, searching for a way to resurrect Enkidu. Spoiler alert, he never found one. In the process, he learned an important lesson. Death is inevitable, but life is precious. Sure, it's a heavy message, but remember, this is the world's first novel we're talking about here. So perhaps it's not surprising that the author didn't quite nail the ending. The Epic of Gilgamesh is much more than a good yarn. It was the first attempt in recorded history to answer life's biggest questions. Death, existence, the universe, and everything. It is a deeply moving story. But let's face it, the writing is not exactly sparkling. If you compare it to something more modern, say Breaking Bad, you'll notice the similarities. Both stories begin with an ordinary person who gets fed up with the status quo and tries to change it. They both feature unlikely friendships between characters. They both tackle existential themes. One of them has better special effects, but where would Walter White be without the Epic of Gilgamesh? What would he read on his iPad if it weren't for those ancient Sumerians and their crazy writing tablets? How does a story that's almost 5,000 years old still matter today? Why do we tell the story of Gilgamesh today? It's because his story is really our story. Over the millennia, it has been retold in countless different versions, and its echoes can be found in works as diverse as the Odyssey, the Quran, and even Disney's Snow White. If you've ever heard the story of Cinderella, for example, you can thank the Sumerians for that. They published the first version of the tale a few centuries before the brothers Grimm were even born. In many ways, then, Gilgamesh is our oldest friend. He's been through the ups and downs of life. Love, death, friendship, and everything in between. He's been there. He understands our joys, our sorrows, our hopes, and our fears. And most importantly, he shows us that we are not alone in this crazy world. We may have to face our problems alone, but we don't have to face them without the wisdom and comfort of our oldest friend Gilgamesh. We hope you enjoyed this episode, with a special thanks to our supporters who make it possible. And if you want to join our community of awesome people, you can check out the link in the description. See you next time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then he settled in and went on a long lunch break. Not this God, though. He worked 7 days straight, creating everything all at once. Mountains, oceans, stars, fish, fowl, animals, Adam, Eve, and then just to spice things up, he invented gambling. This is how the Enuma Elish describes the Babylonian creation myth, and it has all the makings of a classic RPG adventure. Now it's time for our hero to rise, defeat the monsters, take over the universe, and maybe find some friends along the way. In other words, normal business for a Tuesday. But if you were expecting the star of our story to be the big guy upstairs, well, sorry to disappoint. Our story begins in Mesopotamia, literally. The land between two rivers was the fertile plain between the Tigris and Euphrates. Think of it as humanity's first laboratory, where people experimented with farming barley, building irrigation canals, inventing the wheel, writing, and yes, brewing beer. Indeed. Some scholars even suggest agriculture took off not because of bread, but because Sumerians really wanted beer. Our hero, the mighty Gilgamesh, didn't wait for divine appointment. No, he helped himself to the throne of Uruk and became a legendary king, in part because he never stopped talking about himself. Clay tablets tell of his accomplishments: building ships, taming beasts, conquering neighbors, slaying monsters. One time he even raced a boat against the sun. I set out to race the sun, my vessel swift of sail. He sped over the sea. We raced across the river, but he was too strong for me, and he beat me at the game. Gilgamesh ruled Uruk, a city of about 50,000 people. That might sound small compared to today's megacities. But keep in mind, 2,600 years ago, most of the world still lived in villages. Uruk was a proper urban center, complete with towering ziggurats, vast markets, and walls stretching for miles. If there had been a top 10 cities to live in, 2700 BCE list, Uruk would definitely have made the cut. So far, so good. Yet something was missing from the king's life. You see, Gilgamesh was blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it, with immortality in his blood. As a demigod, he should have lived forever, free from the pain and suffering that plagued mere mortals. But here's the thing about immortality. When you're young, it looks pretty sweet, but it's a real downer as you get older. And Gilgamesh, while hardly an old man, was certainly getting tired of living. On top of that, he was lonely, which probably had something to do with the fact that he spent most of his time being insufferable. His subjects loved him, but they kept their distance. His peers envied him, but they refused to associate with him. So what was a frustrated demigod to do? Simple. Go on an epic adventure to find the secret of eternal life, of course. Now, you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, didn't he already have that? Yes, but he had forgotten the secret of immortality. The same one the gods used to make him immortal in the first place. The secret of the cedar forest. Now that sounds nice, but anyone who's ever stayed in a hostel full of drunken Frenchmen knows that forests are dangerous places, and this forest was extra scary. No one had ever entered it and lived to tell the tale, mostly because the trees fought back. To make matters worse, to reach the forest, Gilgamesh had to cross the ocean. Which wasn't exactly a walk in the park either, or in this case, walk in the surfboard. Finally, as if by miracle, a ship offered him passage, captained by a fellow named Utnapishtim. Sure, he warned Gilgamesh that his passengers included a scorpion man, a bird lady, a worm with a human head, and various other creatures. But hey, that's just Tuesday in Mesopotamia. After crossing the ocean, the journey to the forest was almost as bad. They had to ford a river guarded by a giant otter, who demanded Utnapishtim sacrifice his wife and daughter to pass. Gilgamesh intervened, slew the otter, and crossed the river without sacrificing anyone. After thanking the captain for the ride, Gilgamesh continued on foot to the forest. There he met a talking plant that told him he could pluck one cedar sapling from the sacred forest and live forever. The plant didn't seem to mind that the entire forest depended on these saplings to survive. But hey, what does a tree-based creature know about sacrifices? After collecting his reward, Gilgamesh returned to Uruk. Meanwhile, Enkidu, Gilgamesh's loyal friend and sometime lover, was having problems of his own. See, before joining forces with Gilgamesh, Enkidu was a wild man, living among animals, subsisting on plants and generally acting like a real-life Tarzan. It was great until he got called to Uruk for a serious talk with Gilgamesh. During the chat, Enkidu learned about the joys of civilization, specifically the joys of shaved legs. And after accidentally sitting on a honeybee, promptly passing away, Gilgamesh was devastated, especially since the docs gave him a grim diagnosis: "You will die next." Faced with his own mortality, Gilgamesh did what any reasonable person would do. He hit the road to find a magical plant that would restore youth to anyone who ate it. Now, don't ask me why he didn't just try this before becoming best friends with Mr. Dead. Maybe he thought Enkidu was just exaggerating. Unfortunately, the quest was even more dangerous than the previous one. First, he had to deal with the goddess Ishtar, who was angry that he rejected her advances. She sent a giant scorpion after him, but Gilgamesh managed to slay it. Then, in a moment of rare wisdom, he sought the advice of a talking ox. By now, you must be wondering if every animal in this part of the world talks. Maybe they do, but only to annoy everyone. The ox advised him to return to Utnapishtim, who had the gift of prophecy and might know a suitable substitute for scorpion. On the way, Gilgamesh decided to stop at the house of a fellow named Siduri, who was famous throughout Mesopotamia for brewing potent beer. In the end, she gave him 2 pieces of advice. 1, don't go to the cedar forest, it's dangerous. And 2, drink a few pints of my amazing ale. Clearly her real job was being a bartender, so Gilgamesh paid her no heed and headed to the ocean. He found Utnapishtim tending to his vineyards. Apparently the secret to immortality was a tip of the iceberg. Gilgamesh discovered that his friend had survived the flood that destroyed the world by listening to the gods and building a massive boat. Utnapishtim agreed to help Gilgamesh find the plant of youth, but warned him that even if it worked, only gods enjoyed true immortality. Humans could postpone death, but they couldn't avoid it completely. Still, Gilgamesh had come so far, he might as well finish the job. The next day they set sail and soon arrived at the cedar forest. Utnapishtim gathered cedar branches to launch the boat. Gilgamesh walked around and picked some flowers. Just then, a giant fishy-gull swooped down to claim his prize. Gilgamesh knew the stakes. If the fish-eagle won, he'd return empty-handed and possibly dead. If he won, he'd regain his immortality. So he accepted the challenge and promptly lost. But just as the fish-eagle was about to deliver the killing blow, Utnapishtim finished preparing the boat. They sailed away, and the fish-eagle had nothing to show for its efforts but a bouquet of flowers. Gilgamesh took the plant back to Uruk. There, according to the version of the story told by the Sumerians, he shared its power with his people, bringing youth to the elderly and health to the sick. Or, according to the Babylonian version, he kept the plant for himself and nearly died trying to figure out how to eat it. You know, you've gone too far when even the gods pity you. They sent a magical bird to snatch the plant from Gilgamesh's hand, plunging him back into the depressing reality of his old age. As the king watched the bird fly away, he finally understood his mortality, accepted it, and instead of trying to defy the natural order of things, devoted his remaining years to making life better for his subjects. They say he ended up ruling wisely and compassionately, earning the love of his people and the respect of the gods. And that's pretty cool, except maybe the bit where he shared the fruit of youth with everyone. So which is it, Mr. Know-It-All? What's the secret to immortality? Sadly, that honor goes to whoever put pen to paper first. Most historians believe the Epic of Gilgamesh was originally an oral tradition passed down from generation to generation before being written down on clay tablets during the Old Babylonian period, somewhere between 1900 and 1600 BCE. Scholars debate whether to call it the world's first epic poem, a sort of Mesopotamian Iliad or Odyssey. At the very least, it's the oldest surviving work of literature. Written in cuneiform script, and one of the oldest stories to explore universal themes like friendship, loss, grief, acceptance, and the search for meaning in a chaotic world. It's also quite possibly the first piece of fiction featuring a truly terrible boss. A long time ago, in a kingdom far away, a great king ruled over his people. His name was Gilgamesh. He built huge walls around the city, tamed nearby forests, and led his people to victories in war. However, Gilgamesh wasn't a saint. He was incredibly cocky, often boasting about his greatness. Claimed that he was 2/3 God and 1/3 man. He thought he was superior to everyone else because he was part god. People suffered greatly under his reign. So the gods grew furious with Gilgamesh and wanted to teach him a lesson. They decided to send a man named Enkidu to challenge Gilgamesh. When Gilgamesh first saw Enkidu, he realized that he was a strong and brave man. And Gilgamesh invited him to compete against him in a series of challenges. The winner would become the king of the land. But in the end, the competition turned into a big fight. The two fought each other fiercely, but neither one would give up. And so the battle continued throughout the day, and neither of them was able to beat the other. Gilgamesh felt very ashamed. He couldn't believe that he needed help from someone to defeat this man, so he prayed to the gods to save him. However, the gods didn't come to help Gilgamesh, but instead told him that he had to keep fighting until one of them gave up. And so the battle continued throughout the night, but eventually Gilgamesh got tired and he started to lose hope. But suddenly he remembered something his father had once told him. He said that if you're ever exhausted and feel like giving up, then take some rest. You don't have to win every single fight. It's okay to be defeated sometimes. Gilgamesh followed his advice and sat down on the ground. He took a deep breath and looked at his opponent. Gilgamesh asked Enkidu to shake hands, and Enkidu accepted. After that, they became best friends, and together they ruled over the land. So that's how the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu ended. They became best friends and ruled over the land together. But why did the gods want to send Enkidu to Gilgamesh? Well, they wanted to teach Gilgamesh a lesson about humility. They wanted him to understand that he wasn't the most powerful person in the world, and that he needed to respect others. But did Gilgamesh learn his lesson? Well, that depends on how you look at it. On one hand, he did become more humble after meeting Enkidu. He learned that it was okay to be defeated, and that he didn't need to win every fight. But on the other hand, he still had a lot to learn. Even though he was now friends with Enkidu, he was still very cocky and boastful. He still thought he was better than everyone else because he was part god. So did Gilgamesh really change? Was he just putting on a show? That's for you to decide. We can see that Gilgamesh has indeed changed a lot. At the start of the story, he was full of himself and believed he was above everyone else. He was cocky and boastful and thought he was better than everyone else because he was part god. However, after meeting Enkidu, Gilgamesh began to understand that he wasn't as invincible as he thought he was. He learned that he could be defeated and that he didn't have to win every fight. This showed humility and maturity as he began to respect Enkidu as an equal despite being part god. But the question remains, did Gilgamesh truly change? Some might argue that he was just pretending to be humble so that Enkidu wouldn't challenge him again. However, we see evidence of genuine change when Gilgamesh tells Enkidu that they should become friends and rule over the land together instead of fighting. This shows that Gilgamesh is capable of empathy and understanding, which is a stark contrast to his previous behavior. He was willing to put aside his ego and pride for the greater good of himself and his people. Ultimately, it's up to the reader to decide whether or not Gilgamesh truly changed. But the evidence does suggest that he was capable of growth and maturity, which is a hopeful message to take away from the story. Now, let's think about the people who were born in the ancient times. Their lives were very difficult. There were no hospitals or advanced technology. People had to rely on their strength and intelligence to survive. They were constantly threatened by wild animals, natural disasters, and other humans. Because of these hardships, people developed a strong desire for a better life. They wanted to escape the pain and suffering that they experienced every day. To cope with their difficult circumstances, people turned to religion for comfort. They believed that there were gods who controlled their lives, and they prayed to them for help. Religion gave people a sense of hope and purpose. It provided them with a way to make sense of the chaos and suffering that they witnessed every day. People believed that if they followed the teachings of their religion, they would be rewarded with a better life, either in this world or in the next. In addition to religion, people also found solace in storytelling. Stories allowed people to escape from their harsh reality and explore new worlds and possibilities. Stories also provided a way to transmit cultural knowledge and values from one generation to the next. Through stories, people could learn about their history, their traditions, and their beliefs. Overall, religion and storytelling played a significant role in the lives of people in ancient times. They provided a source of comfort and hope in a world that was often difficult and dangerous. And now let's talk about the gods. They are all powerful beings who control the fate of mortals. They can grant wishes and deliver miracles. However, they are also capricious and unpredictable. Their decisions are not always logical or fair. They can be as cruel as they are generous. The gods are also jealous and possessive. They demand worship and praise, and they punish those who disrespect them. Despite their flaws, the gods are revered and worshipped by mortals. They are seen as the ultimate authority, and their word is law. People build temples and offer sacrifices in their honor, and they turn to them in times of need. The relationship between the gods and mortals is a complex one. On one hand, the gods are feared and respected, but on the other hand, they are also criticized and questioned. People may beg the gods for help, but they may also complain about their decisions and even defy them at times. One of the most famous stories about the gods is the story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was a king who was known for his intelligence and cunning. He was also very proud and arrogant, and he boasted that he was smarter than the gods themselves. As punishment, the gods condemned him to roll a stone up a hill for eternity. Every time he neared the top, the stone would roll down, and he would have to start over. This punishment was seen as a metaphor for the futility of human effort in the face of divine power. Another famous story is the story of Job. Job was a righteous man who was tested by the gods. They allowed Satan to take everything away from him, his wealth, his family, and his health. But Job never lost his faith in God. He remained steadfast in his belief that everything would work out for the best in the end. The story of Job is a testament to the power of faith and the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity. In the end, we are left to wonder what the purpose of it all is. Why do the gods bother with mortals? Why do they play games with their fates? Why do they allow innocent people to suffer? These questions have been pondered by philosophers and theologians for centuries. Perhaps the gods simply exist for our own edification. They provide a sense of order and meaning in an otherwise chaotic world. Or perhaps they are simply beyond our comprehension. Their ways are not our ways, and their thoughts are not our thoughts. Ultimately, the nature of the gods is a mystery that we may never fully comprehend. And so the story of Gilgamesh comes to its dramatic conclusion. As you can see, it's a grand tale filled with adventure, battles, and even a bit of romance. Each chapter is like a new surprise, keeping you on the edge of your seat, wondering what will happen next. It's a story about friendship, loyalty, and the search for immortality. But let me ask you this. Did Gilgamesh actually find what he was looking for? Did his journey lead him to enlightenment, or did it only deepen his despair? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh, please give it a thumbs up. Your support means a lot to us. Thanks for watching. After the dust of their first encounter settled and the echoes of laughter died down, something new bloomed between Gilgamesh and Enkidu: friendship. Gilgamesh, no longer a lone wolf, found solace and excitement in the company of the wild man. Enkidu, once isolated by his own ferocity, gained a sense of belonging alongside the king. Their differences, which had sparked the initial confrontation, became the foundation of their bond. Gilgamesh, the epitome of civilization, represented order, culture, and societal norms. Enkidu, on the other hand, personified the raw power of nature, untamed and unbound by societal constraints. The coming together of these two seemingly disparate forces created a unique synergy, a balance of opposing elements that proved to be surprisingly harmonious. Together, they embarked on a journey to slay the monster Humbaba, a monumental task that would test the limits of their friendship and courage. As they ventured deeper into the cedar forest, the heart of Humbaba's domain, the forest grew darker and more menacing. The towering cedar trees seemed to close in around them, their branches intertwined, forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. The air grew heavy with moisture, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The sounds of the forest changed too. Birdsong was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. The companions pressed on, their steps echoing ominously in the stillness. Their resolve hardening with each step, the forest tested not only their bravery, but also the strength of their bond. Every gnarled tree, every twisty root seemed determined to challenge their path, to test their unity. Yet through it all, they held firm, their friendship serving as the anchor in the face of the forest's daunting embrace. The forest had its way of testing one's spirit, of bringing even the strongest to their knees. Would it break their newfound camaraderie? Only time would tell. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Part 2. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, had received a prophecy. He would die young. To cheat death, he sets out on a great journey to find immortality. So far, he has left his home city, crossed plains, mountains, rivers. Each night, Gilgamesh dreamed of omens, collapsing mountains, darkened skies, roaring beasts. He woke in sweat, shaken. Enkidu reassured him. "Fear not, my friend. These are signs the gods walk with us." Perhaps Enkidu was simply boosting morale, like a coach in the locker room. Because if the dreams had been interpreted another way, the journey might have ended on the very first night. At last, the cedar forest loomed before them. Towering trees, canopies thick enough to blot out the sun. The air was cool yet heavy, as if nature itself knew it was hiding a monster. They had come for the plant of life, but first they must slay the guardian of the forest, Humbaba, the terror of mankind. The two friends looked at each other. This was the real test. Who were they? What could they do? How would history remember them? Humbaba appeared. Towering, ferocious-faced, his voice rumbled like thunder, his breath poured out like fire. The Sumerians called him the terror of mankind. Gilgamesh hesitated for a moment, but Enkidu shouted, "Fight! We were not born to retreat!" And so the two charged forward. Gilgamesh swung his axe. Enkidu hurled his spear. Humbaba fought back with the power of the forest. Winds howled, the earth trembled, trees crashed to the ground. All of nature seemed his ally. But then, the god Shamash sent 13 mighty winds, trapping Humbaba in a whirlwind. The monster staggered, cornered, desperate. He begged for mercy. "Spare me. I will be your servant forever." Yet Gilgamesh and Enkidu, hungry for glory, did not listen. With a final strike, they killed Humbaba. The cedar forest roared with collapse, and the world fell silent. News of victory raced back to Uruk. The people rejoiced. Feasts erupted. Barley beer flowed like rivers. Gilgamesh and Enkidu were hailed as heroes. But high above, the god Enlil seethed. "They have slain Humbaba, the guardian I set over the sacred forest. Mortals have dared trespass upon the forbidden." Punishment did not fall immediately, but dark clouds gathered over the fate of the two heroes. The gods debated, should they live or should they die? Nella argued for death, but the goddess Nia, seeing Gilgamesh's humanity, pleaded for life. In the end, Gilgamesh was granted a long life, but he would never know true immortality. As for Enkidu, the gods decreed that he would die. A curse upon the cedar forest. But even in the midst of these divine deliberations, the mortal story does not end. Amid Uruk's celebrations, the goddess Ishtar, goddess of love and war, set her eyes upon Gilgamesh. She burned with desire for his strength and beauty. She approached him with an offer of marriage. "Be my husband, and I will grant you eternal glory." Tempted words, but Gilgamesh, wise in the rudest possible way, listed all of Ishtar's former lovers whom she had abandoned, and declared, "I will not be your next victim." Ishtar flew into a rage. She stormed up to the heavens, weeping before her father Anu. "Let me avenge myself. Give me the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk." Anu, reluctant, consented. And so the colossal bull of heaven descended, trampling fields, draining rivers dry, cracking the earth beneath its hooves. The people of Uruk fled in terror. Gilgamesh stood firm, brandishing his axe. "You are a demon unleashed," he shouted, "and demons shall perish by my hand." The bull of heaven charged, smashing down its massive head. Gilgamesh ducked under its bulk, leaping up to hack at its haunches. The bull bucked and bellowed, shaking off the blow, and the battle raged across the plain. It was Gilgamesh versus the gods, the mortals against the heavens. And in this story we ask who would win. The bull reared back, preparing to gore. Gilgamesh dodged and scrambled behind a nearby stone. Panting, he scanned for an opening, a weakness, anything to exploit. Then he saw it, a small gash on the bull's shoulder from where he had nicked it earlier. The wound was slight, but it was there. Gilgamesh took off running, circling the bull, keeping just out of reach. He was tiring, but he had to keep going. He couldn't afford to let the bull get a clean hit. Suddenly the bull blundered, crashing into a stone pillar, momentarily stunned. Gilgamesh seized the moment, dashing forward and burying his axe deep in the bull's shoulder, right into that small cut. The bull screamed, a sound that shook the foundations of the city, and thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge the axe. But it was no use. Gilgamesh held firm, his arms burning, legs aching, refusing to budge. Then slowly the thrashing grew weaker. The screams turned into whimpers. And finally, the bull of heaven collapsed, collapsing onto the ground with a final sigh. Gilgamesh stood up, letting out a yell, his whole body screaming in protest. But he didn't care. He had won. Around him, the people of Uruk began to emerge from their hiding places, staring in awe at the fallen bull and their heroic king. But in the distance, on top of a nearby mountain, two pairs of eyes watched, one filled with admiration, the other with disappointment. On the left side stood the goddess Naya, smiling down at the scene below. Beside her, however, the god Enlil continued to frown, his arms crossed, unconvinced about the wisdom of granting Gilgamesh more life. Meanwhile, back in Uruk, the entire city seemed to erupt in celebration. People danced around the fallen bull, singing songs of Gilgamesh's valor. But amidst the merriment, a single figure stood apart, watching quietly. It was Enkidu, Gilgamesh's closest friend and companion. He had not joined the revelry. Instead, he stood gazing at the horizon, a distant look on his face. Gilgamesh noticed this and walked over to him. "Why don't you join the celebration, Enkidu? We have defeated the bull of heaven. Uruk is safe." Enkidu turned to him, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. "Gilgamesh, do you remember our journey to the cedar forest? When we slew Humbaba?" Gilgamesh nodded. "Of course I do. It was our greatest adventure. We faced the terror of mankind and emerged victorious." "Yes," Enkidu said softly. "And do you recall what happened afterwards? How the gods punished me for helping you slay Humbaba. They cursed me to die." Gilgamesh felt a pang of guilt. He had never thought much about Enkidu's sacrifice until now. He put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I am sorry, Enkidu. I didn't realize it would cost you so much." "It's all right, Gilgamesh," Enkidu said with a sad smile. "I knew the risks when I joined you on this quest, was willing to pay the price for glory." Gilgamesh shook his head. "No, Enkidu, this isn't about glory. This is about our friendship. I owe you my life. You saved me when I was arrogant and reckless. You taught me the value of humility and sacrifice. And now I have failed you." Enkidu placed a hand on Gilgamesh's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Gilgamesh, we both made a vow to face whatever challenges came our way, to stand by each other through thick and thin. We chose this path together. There is no blame or apologies needed." Gilgamesh looked away, unable to speak. The weight of Enkidu's sacrifice pressed heavily on his heart. He had always thought of himself as the hero, the one who would achieve immortality and become a legend. But now he realized that his friend's sacrifice was what had made him a hero in the first place. Without Enkidu's guidance and companionship, he would have been lost. Now Enkidu was dying, and he had no idea how to stop it. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the breath out of his lungs. His chest tightened, and he felt tears stinging his eyes, threatening to spill, but he blinked them away fiercely. He wouldn't cry. He was the king of Uruk, the mighty Gilgamesh. But inside, his resolve was crumbling. He wanted to save Enkidu, he had to. If only he hadn't been so reckless. If only he had listened to Enkidu's advice. If only he hadn't boasted and challenged the gods. None of this would have happened. The guilt and grief threatened to consume him, but he pushed them down, shoving the memories away. He couldn't change the past, but he could honor Enkidu's sacrifice. He would make sure his friend's memory lived on in the tales and songs of Uruk. He would ensure that everyone remembered Enkidu's bravery and selflessness. Because in the end, that's all any of them could do. Remember? So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please feel free to show your support. And I'll see you next time. A long, long time ago, there lived a legendary hero named Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh wasn't alone. By his side stood his best buddy, Enkidu. Together they went on crazy adventures, slaying monsters and looking cool. They were kind of like the ultimate odd couple, an unlikely duo that just worked. Now, Gilgamesh always wanted more gold, more power, more glory. But Enkidu, well, he was happy just hanging out with his bro. One day, the goddess Ishtar got all lovesick over Gilgamesh. She was like, "Hey, hot stuff, be my man." But he was all, "Nah, thanks, but no thanks." And let me tell you, she didn't take rejection very well. To get back at him, Ishtar called in reinforcements, specifically a giant nasty bull with 6 heads. 6. The bull stomped into town, causing all sorts of chaos. But our boys, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, they weren't having it, so they stepped up to face the beast. And let me tell you, the bull's tail lashed, killing hundreds in a single sweep. But the two heroes stood firm. At last, after a battle that must have been seen to be believed, they brought the beast down, severing its head as a trophy. From the city walls, Ishtar shrieked in defeat. Enkidu, with reckless mockery, hurled a chunk of the bull's flesh at her face. You know, the goddess was not pleased. Up in the heavens, the gods convened a meeting, a full-on divine summit to discuss the latest Gilgamesh drama. Now the verdict was grim. They declared, one of the two must die. The sentence fell upon Enkidu. He grew ill, his body wasting away. In his fevered dreams, he saw the underworld, a land of shadows where souls wore feathers, ate dust, and knew no light. At first he cursed his fate, cursed even the very gate that had led him to Gilgamesh. But then, remembering their friendship, he softened, accepted, and breathed his last in his brother's arms. Gilgamesh, he wasn't having it. He refused to accept his friend's death. He covered his friend's body with cloth, wandered the city like a ghost. Days of mourning followed. No food, no sleep. Everywhere one haunting question echoed. Will I too die like Enkidu? I Gilgamesh, the mighty. Shall I become nothing but dust? And you know what? That fear, it was scarier than any monster. Scarier than Humbaba or the bull of heaven. Against those, Gilgamesh had weapons. Against death, he had none. And so he resolved, he would seek the secret of immortality. If he could not bring Enkidu back, at least he might escape fate himself. Gilgamesh left Uruk behind and set out alone. He crossed burning deserts and perilous mountains. Clad in animal skins, hair wild, eyes bloodshot, he looked less like a mighty king and more like a desperate backpacker with no clue where the road ends. Along the way, he met some weird characters who tested his patience. Remember those guardian deities at the mountain gate? They thought it was hilarious to mess with Gilgamesh. We were all, "Hey, you mighty king, what do we want to see ya? What is a favor? Show us your junk in the trunk." But when Gilgamesh refused to strip down, they changed their tune real quick. Oh, okay, cool beans, no worries. And then they showed him the way to continue his journey. One time he came across these two hermits hanging out in the wilderness. They were total recluses, man. They hadn't bathed in forever, and they had this gross habit of eating worms. They challenged Gilgamesh, trying to scare him off. They were all, "Hey, you big shot, why don't you join our worm eating club? It's totally rad." Gilgamesh wasn't having it. He just wanted to keep moving. Then there was this one instance where Gilgamesh stumbled upon a field and saw these adorable little flowers growing there, and it was just too much for him. He started picking them and putting them on his clothes. But wouldn't you know it, as soon as he touched them, the flowers withered and died. Gilgamesh was like, "Whoa, dude, what the heck? Why are you doing this to me?" And the spirit of the flowers was all, "Hey, I'm just messing with you, man. It's all fun and games." Then he offered Gilgamesh a choice. He said, "Okay, here's the deal. If you can guess what plant I am, I'll help you on your journey. But if you get it wrong, well, you gotta stay here forever." And the spirit was like, "Nope, wrong." Then Gilgamesh tried again. "How about a date palm?" "Nope, wrong again."
Yes.
This went on for a while, with Gilgamesh guessing all sorts of plants and trees until finally he got it right. He guessed that the spirit was a flower called the plant of life. And wouldn't you know it, the spirit kept his word. He helped Gilgamesh on his journey, making sure he stayed on the right path. Now, remember, Gilgamesh was on a mission to find immortality. He wanted to escape death, to become a legend that lived on forever. But along the way, he was learning something else. He was discovering the power of friendship, the strength that comes from helping others, and the importance of accepting the natural order of things, including death. Finally, Gilgamesh reached the shore of the Dead Sea, the boundary between the world of men and the dwelling of Utnapishtim, the immortal. There awaited the boatman Urshanabi, but crossing required a hefty price. Normally, Urshanabi didn't play for cheap. He expected an offering of gold or maybe some rare jewels. But what could Gilgamesh offer? What was more precious than gold? His answer came without hesitation. Gilgamesh, with a mix of sadness and determination, pulled out the 12 tablets that held the epic of his life, the story of his adventures, his defeats, his victories, his joys, and his sorrows. These were not just stories. They were his memories, his experiences, his essence. With trembling hands, he handed them over to Urshanabi. The boatman accepted the gift, his face etched with understanding. And with that, the deal was struck. Urshanabi helped Gilgamesh cross the Dead Sea, guiding him through the murky waters towards the house of Utnapishtim, where the secrets of eternity awaited. As the boat moved through the dark water, Gilgamesh couldn't help but think back on his journey. He remembered the laughter of friends, the sting of betrayal, the thrill of victory, and the agony of loss. Each experience had shaped him, made him who he was. And now he was ready to embrace the next chapter, whatever it may hold. The Epic of Gilgamesh. It's more than just a story of daring adventures and battles with mythical beasts. It's a journey of self-discovery, a reflection on the human condition. Even gods and kings cannot escape the shadow of death. However, there is solace in the journey, in the moments we share, the friendships we forge, and the stories we live. Through Gilgamesh's trials and tribulations, we see our own reflections, our fears, our aspirations, and our resilience. So the next time you hear the name Gilgamesh, don't just think of a legendary hero. Think of a friend, a confidant, a seeker of truth, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and wisdom can be found. If you like this retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh, check out more videos on mythology and folklore. And if you love what we do, support us. Your support helps us keep the storytelling alive. Thanks for watching. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was troubled. He looked over his domain and realized that no matter what he did or built, someday it would crumble. He feared his own mortality. So he set off through the cedar forest, seeking the hidden entrance to the mountain of the sun, where, according to prophecy, the secret of immortality was kept. He battled a giant scorpion, crossed the river of hell, defeated a dragon, and climbed up the dangerous mountain. Finally, he stood before Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, the only human who had survived the Great Flood and the only one who knew the secret of immortality. Gilgamesh stepped forward and said, "Utnapishtim, I have braved many hardships to reach you. Tell me the secret to eternal life." Utnapishtim stared at him for a moment and then burst into laughter. "What an impatient fool you are, Gilgamesh. You want to know the secret to immortality, just so you can flaunt your eternal life? Why are you afraid of death? I have seen the fragility of our world. One day I will be old and weak. My strength will fail me and I will die. I do not accept my fate. I won't let death win. I want to live forever." "Haha. Do you think immortality is sold in the market? You must earn it. How? What must I do? If you wish to prove yourself worthy, stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights without sleep. If you can conquer sleep, you may conquer death." Gilgamesh nodded confidently. It is a small price to pay for immortality. And with that, he settled down beside Utnapishtim to begin his vigil. Utnapishtim watched him for a moment, then returned to his work. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, sat proudly on the mat, determined to conquer sleep. Yet as soon as he lowered himself onto the ground, his eyes fluttered shut. Utnapishtim shook his head, chuckling to himself. On the first day, his wife brought out a loaf of bread and placed it beside him. Then she returned to the house. The next day, she brought another loaf of bread and placed it beside the sleeping Gilgamesh. She did this again and again until the end of the 6th day. 7 loaves of bread were piled beside him, crusty and moldy. On the 7th day, Gilgamesh finally stirred. Embarrassed, he stammered, I only closed my eyes for a moment." Utnapishtim turned to him and said, "So you see, death is like sleep. None can escape it. You may not have conquered sleep, But now you have learned something more important, the preciousness of life. You should cherish each moment of it rather than trying to escape it. But Gilgamesh refused to accept his defeat. He argued, I was distracted by hunger. Had I eaten that bread, I wouldn't have fallen asleep. Give me another chance. Allow me to stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights without food or drink. Utnapishtim smiled and agreed to his terms. But his wife said, oh, please don't let him suffer. Look at him. He's already exhausted from the first test. How can we expect him to last without food and water? Utnapishtim nodded, understanding his wife's compassion. He didn't want to crush the young king's spirit, so he said, all right, Gilgamesh, you have passed the test. I will tell you the secret to immortality. Gilgamesh perked up, eager to hear the secret. Utnapishtim continued, at the bottom of the sea lies a plant that can restore youth to the old. If you dive into the sea and retrieve that plant, I will bestow upon you the secret of eternal life. You have my word. I will bring that plant to you. Gilgamesh wasted no time. He rushed to the shore, dove into the water, and swam to the bottom. There he found a beautiful plant that glowed with a golden light. Excited, Gilgamesh grabbed the plant and swam to the surface. As he climbed out of the water, Utnapishtim ran towards him, eager to receive the plant. But when he saw Gilgamesh holding a glowing flower, he stopped in his tracks. What is that plant doing in your hands? You weren't supposed to pick a flower, were you? Confused, Gilgamesh asked. I thought you wanted that plant. Is there a problem? That is no ordinary plant. It is the flower of life. Picking it means sacrificing its powers. I have lost the secret of eternal life. What? But you said that plant would grant me immortality. It does, but only if left untouched. Now that you've picked it, its magic has vanished. Disappointed, Gilgamesh looked down at the flower in his hand, realizing his mistake. Utnapishtim sighed. Don't be sad, Gilgamesh. Although you have lost the flower of life, you still have the chance to gain the secret of immortality. Go back to the sea and dive to the bottom. There you will find a fish. Bring it here, and I will make you immortal. With renewed determination, Gilgamesh dove back into the water. He found the fish and carried it to Utnapishtim. The old man took the fish, sprinkled some magical dust on it, and handed it to Gilgamesh. Eat this fish, and you will be immortal. Gilgamesh hesitated, wondering why Utnapishtim was testing him so much. But his desire for immortality was too strong to resist. He ate the fish and waited for the magic to take effect. But nothing happened. What did you do? You promised to make me immortal? Utnapishtim smiled mysteriously. Close your eyes and listen carefully. As Gilgamesh closed his eyes, he heard the sound of flowing water, birds chirping, and trees rustling in the wind. This, Gilgamesh, is the true secret of immortality. It is not about living forever, but about appreciating the beauty of life in every moment. True immortality is when your deeds and memories live on in the hearts of others. When Gilgamesh opened his eyes, he saw that Utnapishtim was gone. Disappointed, he decided to return to Uruk, empty-handed, carrying the burden of his mortality. As he walked along the city walls, he noticed his people going about their daily lives. He saw children playing, merchants selling their wares, and farmers returning from the fields. Gilgamesh realized that life, with all its joys and sorrows, was a gift to be cherished, not a curse to be escaped. Suddenly, he looked down at the ground beneath his feet and noticed the bricks and stones that made up the road. A realization dawned on him. He had spent countless hours and resources building these walls, making them stronger and more beautiful. These walls were a testament to his hard work and dedication. He continued walking and came across the great temple he had built in honor of the gods. Inside, the priests were chanting sacred hymns, and the people were praying and making offerings. Gilgamesh felt a sense of pride knowing that he had created this place for his people to worship and find solace. As he walked further, he saw the faces of his people. They were happy and prosperous because of the efforts he had put into making their lives better. In that moment, Gilgamesh understood that his true immortality lay in the legacy he had left behind. He realized that he might one day die and be forgotten, but the impact he had made on his people would live on for generations to come. Their stories and memories of him would keep his spirit alive in their hearts. Returning to his palace, Gilgamesh felt a sense of contentment he had never experienced before. He accepted his mortality, knowing that his life had meaning and purpose. From that day on, Gilgamesh ruled Uruk with wisdom and compassion. He focused on making his people's lives better instead of chasing immortality. He lived the remaining days of his life to the fullest, cherishing every moment and leaving behind a legacy that would be remembered for ages. As for Utnapishtim and his wife, they continued to live in their reed hut by the sea, watching over humanity and sharing the secret of immortality with those who were worthy. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From the ashes, Sumer rose, the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of gods, the home of the Anunnaki. This was a culture that thrived along the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, the very first culture to leave its mark on history. And it gifted the world the concept of zero, the sexagesimal system, mathematics, astronomy, poetry, and a pantheon of deities that inspired both awe and terror. This was a society where kings were divine, where priests ruled like princes, where farmers lived in harmony with nature's bounty, where temples soared to touch the sky. But it was also a place of scorching heat and dust storms that could bury a city in an instant. And so, when the goddess Nia made mankind from clay, she endowed them with the strength of the wild bull, swiftness of the nimble gazelle, the fierceness of the hungry lion, and the endurance of the patient mountain goat. They were free to roam the land, hunt wild animals, and live as they pleased. In other words, they were free to be anything but civilized. However, the gods noticed something. Humanity was smart. They crafted tools, they built houses, and most importantly, they built cities. The gods felt threatened, so they hatched a plan. It would make a great flood, destroy humankind, and start over. Only one man survived, and he became the ancestor of a new race, Mankind 2.0. And so begins the story of mankind. For better or worse, the Sumerians believed their gods were in charge. They decided when it rained and when it flooded. They created humans, destroyed them, and started over. And yet amidst all this divine drama, humans had a remarkable track record of building and rebuilding. We constructed villages, towns, and cities. We domesticated animals, cultivated crops, invented writing. But sometimes the gods tested our mettle. Floods ravaged our homes, storms scattered our fields, disease swept through our families. And whenever disaster struck, we looked to the sky and asked why. We craved an explanation, a reason, a purpose. And that is how religion was born. In the beginning, Gilgamesh was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. He was strong, ruthless, and feared. Uruk, his city, was massive. Its walls stretched for 300 cubits, 60 elbows, 30 spans, 15 handspans, and 4 fingers high. Built with mud brick and bitumen, it stood as the pride of Sumer. Gilgamesh strolled through the streets, breathing in the scent of dates, fresh-baked bread, roasting meat. His heart swelled with a strange sense of belonging. Saw young lovers holding hands, parents guiding their children, artisans peddling their wares. Everyone seemed happy except him. Even though he was blessed with everything, Gilgamesh was deeply unhappy. "Oh, my mother, Aruru, you have made me a monster. No one among the people matches me. No man can stand against me in wrestling. No brave man dares challenge my strength. I am weary of living such a solitary life." One day the gods took notice of Gilgamesh's sadness. They wanted him to know that although he was strong, he was not invincible. He needed to face mortality, feel pain, suffer loss, become vulnerable. That is when the gods created a man named Enkidu. He was tall and handsome, broad-shouldered and well-proportioned, with long black hair flowing down his back. But unlike Gilgamesh, Enkidu was a man of the wild, living in harmony with nature, sleeping under the stars, eating berries and nuts. So the gods sent a beautiful woman to seduce Enkidu, lure him away from his animal companions, bring him into the embrace of civilization. As soon as Enkidu laid eyes on her, he knew she was special. Her skin was the color of polished lapis lazuli. Her eyes sparkled like stars. Her lips were redder than pomegranate juice. After weeks of chasing each other around the fields, they finally embraced under the shade of a flowering tamarisk tree. Afterwards, the woman told Enkidu, "You must come with me to see the king. He wants to meet the strongest man in the world." When Enkidu arrived at the palace, the courtiers gasped in amazement. "Who are you?" asked Gilgamesh, eyeing Enkidu suspiciously. Enkidu stepped forward and replied, I am the wild man. People call me Enkidu." Then the two men began to test each other's strength. They grappled, they wrestled, they struggled to pull each other down, and in the end, they were evenly matched. "You are my equal," Gilgamesh admitted grudgingly. "Together we are unstoppable." Soon the two became the best of friends, loyal and true. They shared everything: their hopes, their dreams, their fears. They hunted lions together, defeated dangerous beasts, and explored the farthest reaches of the known world. Gilgamesh even shared his throne with Enkidu, making him co-regent of Uruk. But one day, while exploring the cedar forest, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stumbled upon a clearing. And there in the center stood a giant cedar tree, so tall and majestic it seemed to touch the heavens. Gilgamesh, always eager for a challenge, decided to cut it down. But as he swung his axe, the tree roared. And before he knew it, a giant creature emerged from its trunk. He was covered in scales, with the head of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the claws of a bear. Let out a terrifying roar and charged towards them. And so began the battle between Gilgamesh and the Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest. Gilgamesh fought bravely, but Humbaba was too powerful. He slashed at Gilgamesh with his claws, sending the king sprawling to the ground. Enkidu rushed to help his friend, but Humbaba turned his attention to him and tore him to pieces. Gilgamesh watched in horror as Enkidu fell to the ground, his life force draining away. Enkidu looked up at his friend and whispered, "Do not mourn for me. The gods have decreed that all living things must die. Even you, O king, will one day join me in the underworld." With that, Enkidu closed his eyes for the last time. When Gilgamesh heard those words, he felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that even though he was a god, he was not invincible. Death had claimed his closest friend, and it would eventually claim him too. Overwhelmed with grief and fear, Gilgamesh set out on a quest to find the secret of immortality. He traveled to the ends of the earth, searching for a way to cheat death, but he came up empty-handed. In his despair, Gilgamesh sat down on a nearby stone and wept. And that is when the gods took notice of his sorrow and sent a small plant with leaves like parsley growing out of the water. He reached out and pulled it from the ground, and it turned out to be the flower of youth. All he had to do was drop it into a bath, and his youth would be restored. Excited, he raced home. But just as he was about to enjoy the fruits of his labor, a wily serpent slithered out of the bushes and snatched the plant away. Gilgamesh chased after it, but the serpent was too quick and disappeared into the forest with his prize. Gilgamesh collapsed onto a stone and sighed. The gods had once again thwarted his plans. Now that Enkidu was dead, Gilgamesh wandered the earth like a ghost. He visited the Oracle of Burs, who told him that although he had failed to achieve immortality, he had accomplished great things during his lifetime. "You slew Humbaba, the monster, and rescued Shamash from the depths of Kur. You have brought your city to prosperity. Your deeds will be sung by poets for generations to come." Gilgamesh thought about the oracle's words and realized that maybe immortality wasn't about living forever. Maybe it was about leaving a legacy behind, about making a difference in the world. He returned to Uruk, where the people welcomed him as their hero. Gilgamesh reigned for many years over his beloved city, built temples and monuments, planted gardens and parks, and made Uruk a place of beauty and wonder. Although he never achieved immortality, his story became immortalized, passed down through generations of poets and storytellers. And that, my friends, is why the Epic of Gilgamesh still matters today. You see, in the beginning, Gilgamesh was a flawed hero, was arrogant, selfish, and didn't care about anyone but himself. But through his adventures, he learned the importance of friendship, loyalty, and bravery. He learned that life was more than just about power and glory. It was about the connections we make and the good we do for others. And that is why the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered the first great work of world literature. It is the oldest surviving story of a hero's journey, a tale as old as time itself. It tells us that even though life may be short, our legacy can live on forever. We just need to leave behind something worth remembering. That might be a work of art, or an act of kindness, or simply a life well lived. The choice, my friends, is yours. So go out into the world and make your mark. Who knows, you might just become immortal. The hero Gilgamesh was 2/3 god and 1/3 human. It's not a joke. He was literally the demigod son of the sky god Anu and the human king of the ancient Mesopotamian city of Uruk. So being immortal was really his birthright. Unfortunately, he was kind of a dick. He oppressed his people, and they prayed to the gods to make him mortal. And then Enki, the water god, made him fall in love with a woman named Ishtar, who had an unfortunate habit of getting dumped and then killing the exes. So now Gilgamesh is terrified that she might dump him. To get ahead of it, he does the only reasonable thing he can think of. He goes to her house and yells at her for a whole list of reasons why they should not date, like for starters, your mom is a witch. And then he adds, also, all the other hot single gods and goddesses are way out of my league. So good luck finding someone better than me. Of course, Ishtar did find someone better than him, which meant war. Her goddess mom was furious and sent a giant bull to destroy everything Gilgamesh loved. So he killed the bull and then got punished by having to fight a terrifying monster named Humbaba, whose very name struck terror into the hearts of men. Now, you might remember Humbaba from another story we adapted. He was a mountain spirit who guarded the cedar forest, but here he's more like a lumberjack. See, back in those days, all the trees had life, and if you chopped them down, their souls would come after you, and Gilgamesh didn't want to deal with that. So he went to the oracle at the beginning of the forest to ask for protection. The oracle told him to bring a razor and to shave every part of his body except for a single hair on his privates.
No.
Then the tree spirits wouldn't recognize him, and they wouldn't attack. Honestly, that seems a little counterintuitive, because you know what tree spirits look for in a guy. A full head of luscious hair. Just a tiny little stubble ain't gonna throw him off. Also, as the story goes, when Gilgamesh reached Humbaba, the monster attacked him and tore that one special hair right out.
Ow.
So now he has no protection. And according to the prophecy, any human who enters the cedar forest without this protective hair must die. So Gilgamesh turns tail and runs. But before he leaves, he drops his sword. When he bends down to pick it up, guess what? Another curse. You're never too old for the curse of the clingy magic sword. This one just happens to be animated and possessed by demons. It woe and let go of Gilgamesh's leg and demands that he carry it around for the rest of his mortal life. As soon as he agrees, the sword disappears. Now cursed, Gilgamesh was desperate to undo the damage and return to his immortal glory. So he set out across the ocean to find Utnapishtim, the only human the gods had ever granted immortality to. As a test, Utnapishtim challenged him. If you wish to prove yourself worthy, stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights. If you can conquer sleep, you may conquer death. Gilgamesh nodded confidently, yet the moment he sat down, he fell asleep. Don't lie, you knew that was coming. Mythology can be tragic, but this scene feels suspiciously like a college student saying, I'll stay up all night to study, and then passing out after 10 minutes. Each day, Utnapishtim's wife baked a loaf of bread and set it beside him. By the 7th day, there were 7 loaves, moldy, crusted with time. When Gilgamesh awoke, embarrassed, he stammered, I only closed my eyes for a moment. Utnapishtim chuckled gently, you see. Death is like sleep, none can escape it. Yet Utnapishtim's wife pitied him. She urged her husband, give him at least a sliver of hope. So Utnapishtim revealed a secret, a plant at the bottom of the sea that could restore youth to the old. Gilgamesh dove in, wrestled the depths, and emerged clutching the plant. His heart surged with hope. I will bring this back to Uruk. I will share it with my people. We shall be forever young. But on the journey home, exhausted, he lay down to rest, setting the plant beside him. And then a serpent slithered forth, swallowed the plant, and shed its skin as it crept away. Gilgamesh awoke, saw the loss, and collapsed in grief. All my struggles, all my suffering, all for nothing. All I got was this lousy snake totem pole, and snakes shed their skin. What good is that going to do me? But from that day, the snake became a symbol of rebirth, for it sheds its skin and lives on, while man cannot. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, empty-handed, but as he stood upon the mighty walls, gazing down at the bustling city, he suddenly understood. No, I am not empty-handed. This is immortality. The walls I have built, the temples I have raised, the memory my people hold, He realized everybody dies but works, memory, friendship, and story. These are the paths to eternity. Speaking of stories, where did they come from? How did humanity first invent storytelling? Well, according to some scholars, it began with gossip. Hi, I'm here to tell you about a website that brings the magic of storytelling into classrooms and homes. A platform where teachers and parents can find thousands of guided and unguided storytelling activities for kids and teens of all ages. One of my personal favorites is this person who uses storytelling to teach social skills. Every week they publish new character roleplay cards that you can use to help kids practice things like making friends or asking for help. They also have a ton of resources that can help teens develop empathy and emotional intelligence. It's a great place to find ideas if you need a fun activity for your book club, or even just a cute way to break the ice with your friends. Plus, there's something called Story Sparks, which offers writing prompts to help unlock creativity and improve language skills. My favorite is probably the drag and drop activity, where you can take scenes from a classic fairy tale and drop them into a brand new story. That's how my writers developed their amazing series, Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library. In fact, they used a drag and drop feature to mix and match characters and settings from different books. Then they added some extra twists of their own. The result is a super fun series that encourages kids to discover classic literature. Story Sparks is perfect for classrooms and homeschooling, because each lesson covers learning objectives aligned with Common Core standards. The website even offers detailed lesson plans, so teachers can easily integrate storytelling into their curriculum. Or, if you're a parent, you can find engaging activities that support early literacy skills in your child's native language. And don't worry, they've thought of everything. If you're shy about reading aloud, you can download a PDF of the story, print it out, and read along silently. Or you can stream the audio version if you prefer. Some stories are even available in both English and the language of origin. With over 200 titles in their collection, there's something for everyone. Plus, they add new stories every month. The best part? It's all free. Just visit the website or download the app and sign up. Let's go on. Explore the world of global folktales, fairy tales, myths, and legends. Encourage your kids to fall in love with stories today.
Thanks for watching.
Once upon a time in a land far, far away, or maybe just next door, depending on where you live, there was a demigod named Gilgamesh, 2/3 god, 1/3 man. Now Gilgamesh ruled over a city called Uruk, which means shining city in Sumerian, except it looked more like a shining dump to us because the main exports were weapons, imported slaves, and prostitutes. Gilgamesh was pretty cool, though. He was strong, handsome, and vain. In fact, he thought himself so cool that he decided he needed a cool nickname. So he went to his temple and carved this wedge-shaped stamp seal with his new signature, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, conqueror of the enemies of Uruk. Friend of the goddess Ninsan, half-brother of Enkidu slayer, of Humbaba slayer, of the bull of heaven, tamer of the wild man. Yep, he loved his accomplishments. But despite his confidence, Gilgamesh had a big insecurity, and that was that he would die. One day, Gilgamesh was walking around his city in a foul mood. His friend Enkidu tried to cheer him up by telling him about how great he was, but Gilgamesh just kept bringing up how he'd end up as worm food one day. Then Enkidu said, "Hey, listen, I know someone who can help you with your little problem." So they took a long walk outside of town until they reached a reed hut. And inside was an old guy with a beard down to his knees and sandals made out of crocodiles. They sat down and Enkidu explained why they were there. The old man just nodded slowly. "I knew you'd come," he said, "and I will tell you how to become immortal. But if you want to prove yourself worthy, stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights. If you can conquer sleep, you may conquer death." Gilgamesh nodded confidently. Yet the moment he sat down, he fell asleep. "Ha ha, very funny," Gilgamesh said when he woke up. "Let go." As they walked, the old man, who was Utnapishtim, survivor of the Great Flood, said, "Tell me, do you know why I tested you?" Gilgamesh shrugged. "'Cause I might be able to get immortality, but I already have everything else." And then he just kept talking and talking about how awesome he was. And it got kind of annoying. So finally Utnapishtim said, "Okay, let's change topics." And then they just walked in silence for a while, and it got kind of awkward. So finally Utnapishtim said, "Listen, I'm not going to lie. I'm pretty impressed you stayed awake longer than anyone I've ever tested. But unfortunately, you failed. You see, death is like sleep. None can escape it. Gilgamesh was crestfallen. But then Utnapishtim's wife, who had been silent up until now, piped up. Wait, don't leave yet. Give him at least a sliver of hope. Utnapishtim sighed. All right, here's another way to become immortal. At the bottom of the ocean, there's a plant that restores youth to the old. You can eat it and become as young as you were the day you were born. Gilgamesh dove right into the water, wrestled the fish, the crabs, and the octopus, and eventually pulled the plant out of the sand. It glowed with a rainbow sheen and sent sparks flying as he brought it toward the surface. Gilgamesh surfaced, breathless but triumphant. I have the plant. Now I am truly immortal. I will bring this back to Uruk. I will share it with my people. We shall be forever young. And then he just stared off into the distance dreamily, completely forgetting about the plant. Now we don't know how long he would have stared off into the distance for, but it was definitely long enough for a snake to crawl up his leg, grab the plant and swallow it before shedding its skin and slinking away. Gilgamesh turned, saw what had happened, and slumped down into the water. He cried out, "Why must I suffer so much? All my struggles, all my suffering, all for nothing. I had such hopes for my people. They would be free from old age and death, but now they will never know the gift I found. I cursed the snakes who stole my prize." And then he got angry and punched the water, screaming, "Why? Why?" But really, the answer to his question was that nature doesn't care about our plans and progress. But some say that the snake became a symbol of rebirth, for it sheds its skin and lives on while man cannot. Some say this is the point of the story. But others say no, the real lesson is don't trust snakes. So Gilgamesh came back to shore and trudged back to Uruk. He still felt terrible, but he couldn't deny that the plant's blossoming beauty had refreshed him. And as he neared the city walls, he began to smile. Sure, he was still mortal, but look at the city he had built, the temples he had raised, the festivals he had started. The memory his people held for him, immortality, he realized, is measured by the memory of those who live after you. Everything you create, everything you inspire, these are the things that live on and make you immortal. In fact, he didn't even need the plant. Just look at his friend Enkidu, who died before him. Yet Gilgamesh still remembered their adventures together. It's like when they traveled to the cedar forest, slaying the giant Humbaba. Or when they traveled to the mountains to get the magical bull of heaven, except that one was actually a trick by the gods to test Gilgamesh. But Gilgamesh still considered it one of his greatest accomplishments. Or when they visited the city of Nippur. He winced, remembering that last one. He really needed to stop going to Nippur. But he couldn't deny that everything he had done during his life made him proud. Suddenly, Gilgamesh laughed. He stood up tall upon the mighty walls, lifted his head toward the sky, and bellowed, "Here I am, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and I am content." Now this story comes from ancient Mesopotamia, and the original version has a few differences from this retelling. Like Utnapishtim is just an ordinary human instead of a demigod, and the snake doesn't steal the plant. Instead, Gilgamesh accidentally destroys it. Also, there's a bit more detail about Gilgamesh traveling through the wilderness and hallucinating various monsters. But that sounds pretty boring, so we left it out. Oh, and also the ending is different. But you know what? We gotta cut it to make time for more videos. Check out this playlist for more epic stories from world mythology. Let's return to the story one last time to understand why it matters even today. In fact, even more. How this ancient tale can change our lives. After his wild adventures and meeting Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh comes home, older now and full of wisdom, ready to rule Uruk once more. He climbs to the top of a mountain to survey his city. Here is where the epic ends, and let me tell you, it is perfect. Want to understand why? Let's look at the 3 acts of this story. The first part is about Gilgamesh and Enkidu becoming friends. It is lighthearted, fun, a celebration of camaraderie. It is also the first great adventure in world literature, a band of heroes setting out into dangerous lands. You think of Frodo, Aragorn, and Legolas, or Harry, Ron, and Hermione? The second part is after Enkidu dies. The tone shifts immediately. The poem becomes serious, reflective. It is about loss and grief and searching for meaning. If the first act was about strength and friendship, the second was about loss and grief. Then the third is about awakening. A perfect arc for a hero's journey, and for the dawn of world literature. When Gilgamesh reaches the top of the mountain, he sees the sun rise over Uruk, and his heart fills with pride. He knows now that immortality is not in the body, but in legacy, in name, in what we leave behind. His city, his people, his stories. He realizes it is his purpose as king to build great works and be a good ruler. He has learned that to live with meaning is greater than to live forever. This is humanity's first philosophical truth in literature. Let's take a deep breath and imagine it as a film. This would be the slow-motion ending, solemn music rising, camera pulling from Gilgamesh's face to the grand sweep of Uruk, a message echoing across for millennia. The body fades, by memory, deeds, and stories. These endure. The Sumerians did not compose this epic merely to praise a king, but to whisper a philosophy of life. We are mortal. That harsh truth became the foundation of all philosophy to follow. From Socrates, who made it his life to ponder death, so he could teach others to overcome fear of it, to the Buddha, who taught that attachment leads to suffering, and so we must let go. Every teacher since has circled around the same existential question. If you knew you had only 6 months to live, would you live the rest of your life differently? Your answer reveals what you truly value, and almost no one wants to die. So we cling to life, work harder, get promoted, buy a bigger house, drive a nicer car, eat healthier, exercise more, find the fountain of youth. But what if death is inevitable? What if it is not something to avoid, but something to contemplate, to make peace with? What if death gives life its value? This is the gift of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is the first existential novel in history, a deep dive into humanity's relationship with mortality. In today's episode, we have been exploring Chapter 2, Message and Legacy. Each chapter of this course is like an onion. On the outside, we learn cool facts and figures. But peel back the layers, and there is more, much more. History is full of patterns, and when we understand them, life becomes less confusing. For example, do you know why there have been so many plagues throughout history? Or why empires always rise and fall? Understanding these cycles helps us navigate our own lives, especially today. It turns out that throughout history, people have always gotten sick of rich jerks exploiting everyone. And there have been rebellions, revolutions, and reforms for thousands of years. Just look at the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. And today we see inequality and revolution in every corner of the globe. As history shows us, there are consequences to treating people badly. But history also shows us that things can change for the better. I'll give you another example. Do you know why ancient Rome fell apart? The easy answer is barbarians, but that is wrong. Rome fell apart because it lost its values. The Romans used to be known for law and order and doing the right thing. But by the end, it didn't matter if you were a Roman senator or a peasant. Everyone lived in constant chaos and fear. When society loses its values, it loses everything. But values are not static. They change with time and culture. So which values will we be remembered for? Our greed or our generosity, our compassion or callousness? What do we want future generations to say about us? The epic is not just about Gilgamesh, but about each one of us. In the book, I call this second section of the poem, The Philosophy of Mortality. How does knowing that we will die change how we should live? Is the purpose of life to prolong life? Is it to acquire as much wealth or power as possible? Or is it to wake up every morning and find meaning and beauty in the world? The choice, my friend, is yours. The epic is almost 4,000 years old, but it speaks to us today because it grapples with eternal questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? And what happens when we die? We don't need to believe in Utnapishtim, in the flood myth. What matters is the message. The gods may choose a few to save, but most people will die. So what should we do with our lives? The epic tells us that immortality is not in the body, but in legacy, in name, in what we leave behind. We are remembered not for how long we lived, but for what we left behind. The poet would have looked at the ruins of Uruk and said, "Look how grand it once was." The poet would have looked at Gilgamesh and said, "Look how much he accomplished." The poet would have looked at Enkidu and said, "Look how much he loved his friend." Legacy is the road to immortality. Who remembers the lifespan of Moses, Buddha, Jesus, or Muhammad? Who cares if Jesus died at 33 or Muhammad at 63? No one. These men changed the world, and that is how we remember them. Ask yourself, who recalls the exact lifespans of ancient kings? Almost no one, yet their names survive through temples, statues, and stories. Time erases the body, but not the memory retold again and again. Great works and great love are the only ways to achieve immortality. Legacy is not just about being famous. You do not need millions of followers to leave a legacy. It is about leaving something better than before we arrived. I am going to finish by circling back to where we started. Gilgamesh was a real historical king who ruled in the 26th century BCE. He was a tyrant, and the Sumerians wanted to tell a story about how he overcame his flaws and became a better ruler. This is the origin story of one of history's greatest cities. The epic begins with the building of Uruk, but just as important is how it ends. The poem suggests that Gilgamesh realized that immortality is not in the body, that is, in legacy, in name, in what we leave behind. The story ends with Gilgamesh surveying his beloved Uruk from atop a mountain. He understands that his true immortality is in the prosperity and happiness of his people. Now I have a question for you. After listening to this story, how do you want to be remembered? Take some time to reflect on this and write down your thoughts in the comments. Let us know. Let the algorithms know. Let the whole world know. And who knows, maybe your name will live on for 4,000 years. If you want to keep learning how history can change your life, you can join us online. There are free videos and articles and podcasts and more. Plus, there are members-only perks like monthly live seminars and office hours with me. If you have any feedback, feel free to send me a note directly. I read all the messages you send me, so send me a message. And if you have any suggestions for topics that I should cover in the future, please let me know. And finally, if you liked this video, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. My friends, thank you for coming on this journey through time with me. See you next time. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm excited today to share with you a talk I gave recently at a conference. It was part of a series of talks inspired by great books. My task was to explain why the Epic of Gilgamesh matters today. The Epic of Gilgamesh didn't stop in Sumer. It became the ancestor of humanity's entire epic tradition. In the Bible, the story of Utnapishtim surviving the Great Flood mirrors Noah's Ark. Scholars believe it is the prototype passed down for generations. In the Iliad and Odyssey, the friendship of Achilles and Patroclus, and Achilles' grief, echo Gilgamesh and Enkidu. In the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the heroic journeys, the great battles, the quest for wisdom, all bear traces of this Sumerian root. In other words, if world literature is a giant tree, then Gilgamesh is the oldest root we have found. The miracle is that the story almost vanished. When Uruk fell, the clay tablets were buried in sand. For over 2,000 years, no one knew Gilgamesh's name. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists excavating the Library of Nineveh uncovered thousands of broken tablets. Scholars pieced them together, deciphered the cuneiform, and realized with astonishment this was an epic written 4,000 years earlier. In that moment, humanity heard the echo of its ancestors. Remember, we have been asking about life and death since the very beginning. Today we live in an age of technology, debating artificial intelligence, uploading memories to machines, dreaming of digital immortality. But the question remains the same. What is the point of living forever? Gilgamesh reminds us. What matters is not extending existence, but living a meaningful life, leaving a mark, a work, a memory in the hearts of others. You may not build walls like Gilgamesh, but you can build walls of memory within your family, your friends, your community. That is immortality of the everyday, no less great. The Sumerians told Gilgamesh's tale by firelight. 4,000 years later, we tell it again by the glow of our screens. But the essence is unchanged. Stories are fire. Fire that warms the community. Fire that passes from generation to generation. Fire that reminds us we lived, loved, longed, and asked the same question. What remains when we die? Gilgamesh did not find immortality of the body, but he became immortal in this fire, because we, 4,000 years later, still speak his name. If we had to sum up the Epic of Gilgamesh in one witty line, it would be this. The story of a king who sought immortality, failed miserably, but ultimately succeeded. Because we've been retelling his tale for 4,000 years? Exactly so. He failed in his personal quest, yet triumphed beyond imagination, becoming the very first icon of human literature. So when we speak of the Epic of Gilgamesh, we're not just talking about some ancient king, we're talking about ourselves, with our friendships, our pain, our arrogance, our fears, and our burning desire to leave a mark. Gilgamesh died. Uruk crumbled to ruins. But the story lives on. Each time we retell it, the flame is lit once more. So what does the Epic of Gilgamesh actually teach us? Let's look at 3 key points. Point no. 1. The hero is flawed. Gilgamesh is 2/3 God, 1/3 human. 2/3 God means he's strong, powerful, brave, charismatic, almost invincible. 1/3 human means he's also arrogant, impulsive, reckless, petty. Does he change? Does he learn? Yes, a little. After his friend dies, he becomes less full of himself, humbler, more determined to seek wisdom. But let's be honest, not much. Kingship isn't exactly a school for humility. In fact, the opposite. Power makes Gilgamesh even more headstrong. This is why he doesn't listen to the advice of Ninsan or Siduri. This is why he rushes into the cedar forest, endangering his life. This is why he boasts to Humbaba about slaying dragons. He's too proud to admit he's afraid. Why do we love such characters? Because they remind us of ourselves. Our potential for greatness, yes, but also our stubbornness, our pride, our tendency to rush ahead without thinking. Point number 2. Friendship is tested by loss. From the moment Enkidu appears, there's chemistry between him and Gilgamesh. They fight, they tease, they help each other, they become best friends. What strengthens their bond? Adversity. When they face monsters, when they defy the gods, when they overcome obstacles, their friendship deepens. But how does it fare when Enkidu dies? Tragically, this is when we see the power of their bond. Gilgamesh is devastated. He refuses to accept the permanence of death. He keeps insisting that Enkidu must return. And although he fails in his goal, this desperate attempt at bringing back his friend reveals the depth of their relationship. There aren't many pairs of friends like this in world literature. Think about it. How many friends would go to the ends of the earth for their buddy? How many of us would be so inconsolable over losing a friend that we de-risk everything to bring them back? If you're like me, you probably realize that such friendships are rare, and yet it is precisely this rarity that makes them so touching. As readers, we feel the weight of the loss. And in Gilgamesh's inconsolable grief, we catch a glimpse of our own capacity for love and sorrow. No. 3. Immortality is a difficult journey. Gilgamesh's search for immortality takes him through many stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. At times, he seems childishly impatient. He wants magic plants, secret potions, divine intervention. At other times, he's more philosophical, more reflective, talking about legacy, about the inevitability of death, about the need to make peace with one's fate. Which version of Gilgamesh do you relate to more? Are you frustrated by his recklessness? Or do you understand his fear of mortality? Let me confess that I used to think the answer was obvious. Death is inevitable. It's silly to try and deny it. We should learn to accept it. And yet, to be honest, as I've grown older, I've begun to understand both sides of this argument. On the one hand, nothing in life is guaranteed. So why waste time worrying about what might happen in the future? On the other hand, death touches each of us sooner or later. It's natural to resist that reality. In the end, Gilgamesh doesn't attain immortality, but he does learn a valuable lesson. The point of life is not to prolong it indefinitely, but to live it well, to make it rich, to fill it with accomplishment, and above all, with human connection. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a universal story because it's about timeless themes. It's about the pains of growing up, the pangs of lost friendship, the inevitability of death. But it's also about a hero's journey, a hero who changes and grows, a hero who teaches us something about life. What does the Epic of Gilgamesh teach us? Above all, it teaches us the importance of friendship. Enkidu is the best friend we could ever hope for. Loyal, courageous, honest, loving, devoted. He's the kind of friend who brings out the best in us, who challenges us, who helps us become better versions of ourselves. If you're lucky enough to have a friend like that, Cherish them. Value their presence. Be grateful for their influence in your life. The Epic of Gilgamesh also teaches us about courage. Gilgamesh is terrified to confront Humbaba, yet he does it anyway. He faces his fears, defies the odds, and comes out victorious. What about you? What scares you? What do you need to face in your own life? Remember Gilgamesh? Be courageous in the face of adversity. The Epic of Gilgamesh also teaches us about wisdom. At times, Gilgamesh is impulsive and reckless, but as he matures, he begins to understand the limits of his knowledge. He realizes how much he doesn't know and how important it is to keep learning. So never stop asking questions. Never stop seeking knowledge. Never stop growing in wisdom. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a complex, multi-layered story that has captured the imaginations of readers for centuries. It's a story of friendship, of love, of loss, of courage and wisdom. Most importantly, it's a story that teaches us about ourselves. So if you haven't read the Epic of Gilgamesh, I highly recommend it. And if you have, I encourage you to read it again. You won't regret it. Thank you very much.